Some kings ruled with armies, others ruled with fear. But then, there were kings who ruled through rituals, so bizarre, so unbelievable, that they blur the line between legend and truth. Imagine a king who bathed in blood before sunrise to cleanse his soul, another who forced his people to worship his shadow as if it were divine, and yet another who believed swallowing pearls would grant him immortality. These aren't myths. These are forgotten fragments of human history, rituals that defined the most powerful men of their age. Tonight, step into the shadows of forgotten palaces, where the crowns were heavy, the torches burned low, and the strange rituals of ancient kings whispered of fear, power, and obsession, the weight of the crown. The story of kings is never just about politics or war. It is about symbols, about the myths men build to keep their power alive. A crown was never just gold. It was a message. A throne was never just wood. It was a stage, and rituals, especially the strangest, ones were the glue that bound king to kingdom, reminding subjects that their ruler was more than human. But history, as it is taught in classrooms, often strips away the strange, the bizarre, the haunting details. The dull pages show us treaties and battles, but they rarely show us the man who whispered prayers into skulls before marching into war, or the king who refused to eat unless his food was blessed by a serpent shadow. These are the stories that were buried under layers of dust and skepticism, and yet they reveal more about human nature than the grand wars ever could. Ritual of blood and purity, the kings of Mesoamerica. Our first step takes us into the heart of ancient Mesoamerica, where kings were not just rulers, but bridges between gods and men. The Aztec and Mayan kings practiced rituals that, to the modern mind, sound terrifying, yet to their people, they were sacred. There was a belief that the sun itself demanded nourishment, and what could feed the sun better than human blood? Aztec emperors would pierce their own flesh, tongues, ears, even genitals to offer their lifeblood to the gods. Imagine the sight, a king standing atop a temple, golden jewelry catching the morning light, while his blood dripped onto the stone steps below. But this wasn't madness. It was theater. It was politics. It was power. The king who bled proved he was no ordinary man. He was chosen, willing to suffer for the survival of his people. Whether his people feared him or adored him, it hardly mattered. In their eyes, he was divine. The shadow, worshipping Pharaoh, crossed the ocean to ancient Egypt, where pharaohs believed themselves to be gods walking on earth. Some rituals here were meant to erase the line between mortal and divine. There is a lesser known account of a pharaoh who declared that his shadow, yes, his shadow, was sacred. None of his subjects were allowed to step on it, not even by accident. If his shadow fell across the marketplace, people were forced to kneel as if a god himself had descended. Think about that. The simplest thing, a shadow, became an object of terror and worship. Children learned not to run when the king passed. Women bowed their heads. Men avoided even looking toward the ground for fear of being accused of disrespect. His shadow became an invisible cage around his people. It may sound absurd now, but this ritual worked. By turning the intangible into something holy, the king ensured his authority extended into places no guard could reach, into the very instincts of his people. Obsession with immortality, the pearl, eating kings of India. Travel eastward into ancient India, where kings were consumed by a ritual more extravagant and perhaps more delusional than any other, the ritual of eating pearls. In their courts, where incense smoke curled into the rafters and dancers moved like shadows, some kings believed that pearls ground into dust and swallowed with wine would grant eternal life. The ritual was expensive beyond belief. Emptier treasuries emptied to crush gemstones into powder. It was not just vanity. To those kings, death itself was treason. If the king was divine, then how could he die? And so every swallow of pearl dust was both defiance and desperation, a ritual against the inevitable. Ironically, the pearls poisoned them slowly. Their lust for immortality only dragged them faster toward the grave. But to their followers, watching their king drink liquid pearls must have been awe-inspiring. Here was a man who could devour the treasures of the earth itself. What mortal could ever challenge such a ruler? Rituals as masks of fear. What links these kings across oceans and centuries is not geography, but psychology. Each ritual, whether it was blood, shadow, or pearls, carried a secret message. The king feared being ordinary. He feared losing control. And so he wrapped himself in rituals that turned fear into reverence. Think of it, what is stranger? A man slicing his skin to feed the sun, or a modern leader hiding behind propaganda, wealth, or spectacle? Rituals may change, but the human hunger behind them, the hunger to be more than human, never really disappears. A glimpse beyond the curtain. And so, as part 1 closes, the curtain has only just begun to rise. What we've seen are rituals that shock the mind, but they are only the beginning. Ahead lies stranger ground. The kings who built tombs of silence, who married rivers, who forced their people to sleep in fields of fire. The deeper we go, the more one truth becomes clear. History isn't boring. It is haunted. Haunted by rituals that kings used to seduce, terrify, and enslave the souls of those who bowed before them. The king and the bread of power. In medieval Europe, kings and rituals walked hand in hand, though rarely in ways people expected. One lesser-known practice belonged to certain monarchs who believed that bread blessed by their touch carried divine healing powers. Picture the scene, a crowded courtyard, peasants lining up with sick children in their arms, each hoping for a miracle. The king steps forward, robed in velvet, a crown heavy upon his head. A loaf of bread, warm from the oven, is placed into his hands. He tears it, slowly, deliberately, then offers it piece by piece. To the poor, it was food. To the faithful, it was medicine. To the king, it was ritual. Behind the bread lay strategy. If he could heal, he could rule without question. A king who touched bread and cured sickness wasn't just human, he was chosen by God. Whether the bread actually healed didn't matter. What mattered was the theater of faith, the binding of loyalty through ritual, the whispering crowns of England. Rituals weren't always loud. Some were hidden, whispered, and dangerous. In England's medieval courts, certain kings believed their crown held power only if purified with secret chants before dawn. Imagine a king's chamber before sunrise, lit only by flickering candles. Priests circle the crown, murmuring prayers in Latin no commoner could understand. The king kneels, listening, half in fear, half in hunger for certainty. Without the whispers, he believed the crown would lose its fire, and rebellion might spread like disease. This ritual reveals something striking. Kings who appeared unshakable by day were often fragile in the darkness of their own chambers. The crown was not enough. They needed the invisible armor of ritual to steady their trembling souls. The king who married the river. In Eastern Europe, there's a tale of a king who performed a ritual wedding each spring, not with a queen, but with a river. The people gathered along the banks, flowers in their hair, drums echoing across the water. The king stood upon a platform dressed in white and cast a golden ring into the current. With that gesture, he became the river's eternal husband. To outsiders, it seemed absurd, but to his people, it was sacred. It was sacred. The river gave life to the crops, the livestock, the very breath of the land. By wedding it, the king declared himself not just ruler of men, but guardian of nature. If floods came, it was his fault. If the harvest failed, it was his broken vow. His power depended not on swords, but on this strange marriage to flowing water. Rituals of silence. Some kings built their authority not with words, but with silence. In the court of a Central European monarch, silence itself was ritualized. When the king entered the throne room, no one, not even nobles, dared to speak until he allowed it. At first, this seems like simple discipline. But it became far more than that. People began to fear silence itself, to read meaning into every pause. A cough could feel like rebellion, a whisper like treason. The king had turned nothingness into a weapon. This ritual of silence reached its peak when the king would sit for hours without uttering a single word, forcing his courtiers to sweat in stillness, their thoughts turning against them. Some broke into confession, others wept. For the king, silence was not. Absence, it was domination, the poisoned chalice. Rituals could be darker still. Empires of Renaissance Europe, kings would host great banquets where one goblet of wine was rumored to be poisoned. The ritual was simple and cruel. The goblets were passed around. Each noble took a sip, praying the king's eyes did not linger too long upon them. The king himself would drink last, savoring the fear in the room. Most of the time, no poison was used at all. But the ritual worked because everyone believed in its possibility. This ritual was less about ceremony, more about psychology. It reminded nobles that life and death rested on the king's whim, even during feasts, even in laughter. Trust was impossible. Loyalty was survival. The thread beneath it all. When we examine these European kings, the strangeness of their rituals is clear. Bread turned divine, crowns whispered over, rivers married, silence sharpened into a blade, chalices carrying death. But beneath the surface, one truth ties them together. Each ritual was an answer to fear. Fear of rebellion, fear of famine, fear of mortality, fear of insignificance. The rituals were masks covering fragile men with the illusion of godhood. And yet for centuries they worked, because humans do not follow crowns alone. They follow stories, they follow symbols. And no one understood this better than the kings who built their reigns upon strange rituals that still echo in the shadows of history. Closing the second chapter. As part 2 closes, Europe's strange kings stand revealed. Men who used bread as medicine, silence as chains, rivers as brides, and shadows as weapons. But we are still only halfway into this journey. Beyond Europe, stranger stories await, tales from Asia, Africa, and forgotten kingdoms where rituals stretched beyond belief. Kings who burned libraries to protect secrets. Kings who slept among the dead to gain visions. Kings who demanded storms be summoned to prove their divinity. The strangest rituals are still ahead. In ancient China, emperors claimed the mandate of heaven, a divine right to rule given by cosmic order itself. But with that belief came rituals that blurred the line between astronomy and sorcery. One emperor performed a ritual each month in which he climbed alone to the top of a sacred observatory, dressed in midnight blue robes stitched with silver stars. There, he spoke into the night sky, whispering his decrees as if the heavens themselves were his counsel. The stars were witnesses, and his words, he believed, rewrote destiny. For his people, the ritual was both awe and terror. If the crops flourished, the emperor was aligned with heaven. If famine came, it meant heaven had withdrawn its blessing. And so every whispered word to the stars became a gamble between divine glory and divine punishment. The ritual of sleeping among the dead. Across the Middle East, in ancient Mesopotamia, one king believed wisdom came not from the living but from the dead. His ritual was grim. Once each year, he descended into the royal tombs and slept on the stone floor among the coffins of his ancestors. Imagine the sight, torches burning low, shadows bending across carved walls, the king lying in silence while the smell of dust and death wrapped around him. He believed their spirits whispered guidance to him in dreams. For his people, this was terrifying yet strangely comforting. Their king had access to knowledge they could never touch. But to the king himself, the ritual carried another weight. To rule the living, he first had to confront the silence of the dead, the Maharaja, and the fire of purity. In India, alongside the pearl-swallowing kings, there were rulers who tied themselves to fire. One Maharaja, convinced his body would resist flames, performed a ritual where he stood barefoot in burning fields to prove his divinity. The fields would be set ablaze, crackling with heat, while priests chanted and drums shook the earth. The Maharaja walked calmly, robes billowing, as if fire itself had been tamed by his will. In truth, his attendants prepared paths of ash where the flames burned weakest. But the crowd never saw the trick. To them, their king walked where no mortal could. His ritual created fear, faith, and the illusion that he belonged not to men, but to gods, the sultan and the perfume of power. Not all rituals were fire and blood. Some were softer, stranger. In the palaces of the Ottoman sultans, perfume itself became ritual. One sultan demanded that his robes be soaked in rare oils every morning. The scent, heavy with rose, amber, and musk, would trail through the palace long before his arrival. Courtiers claimed they could feel his presence before seeing him. The ritual turned aroma into authority. Smell is the oldest sense, tied to memory and instinct. For the sultan, it was a weapon. His people learned to associate his fragrance with power, with fear, with divinity. Even after he left a room, the lingering perfume reminded them he was everywhere, invisible yet inescapable. The king who commanded storms. Farther east, in forgotten kingdoms along the Pacific, rulers performed rituals to summon storms. One king stood upon cliffs with shamans beating drums and lifting his arms to the sky, demanding the seas obey him. Did storms truly rise because of him? Perhaps not, but timing was everything. His advisors studied the winds, the clouds, the tides. They told him when to perform the ritual, ensuring the sky would answer. To his people, the king was no mere man. He was the stormbringer. What mattered was not truth, but theater. Ritual is theater with consequences, and for this king, the sea itself became